the wire pressed against her ribs. Sarah's hands shook as the woman behind the table slid the wedding ring closer. Gold band. Simple. Engraved inside. Margaret and John, 1952. Removed from Forest Home Cemetery just last week, the woman said with a smile. The widow was buried wearing it. Clean extraction. Sarah forced herself to nod, to reach for her purse, because she wasn't just a grad student anymore. She was an infiltrator. 4th visit to this grave robbers market. 4th night pretending to be a buyer. And tonight, every word was being recorded. 3 tables over, the funeral director from Lincoln Park examined a tray of gold teeth. The same man who'd been on the news last month praised for his compassionate service to grieving families. He was the inside man. And he just looked up at Sarah. This is the story of the light in the window, of the market beneath Chicago, of the grad student who became a criminal to catch criminals, and of the night her cover was blown. Hit subscribe, because what happens in the next 10 minutes will leave you speechless. Sarah Mitchell couldn't sleep. From her 23rd floor apartment in Chicago's South Loop, she had a view that stretched across the city. She knew the skyline intimately, which buildings stayed lit all night, which went dark at midnight. The warehouse district to the southwest had always been a stretch of darkness. But 4 nights ago, something changed. A light appeared. Single. Flickering. In the 4th floor window of a brick warehouse she knew had been condemned since a fire in 1987. The city had fenced it off, posted no trespassing signs. Yet there it was. Candlelight, she thought, burning at exactly 2:17 a.m. The first night, she dismissed it. Urban explorers, probably. The second night, when the light appeared again at the exact same time, she started paying attention. The third night, she got her binoculars. What she saw made her forget about sleep entirely. Movement, not chaotic but organized. People arriving separately, entering through a gap in the fence, disappearing into the building. Then, about an hour later, leaving the same way. Some carried small bags. Over 3 nights, she counted 23 different individuals. Well-dressed, most of them. Not the demographic she'd expect in an abandoned warehouse at 2 a.m. On the 4th night, Sarah made a decision. She was a graduate student studying forensic anthropology. She couldn't call the police. People entering an abandoned building wasn't exactly a priority crime, and she couldn't let it go. Her training had taught her to trust patterns, and this pattern screamed organization. She dressed in dark clothes and left her apartment at 1:45 a.m. The October air was cold as she walked southwest toward the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, 5 stories of brick and broken windows. The chain-link fence had a section cut and folded back. Sarah slipped through. Inside, the ground floor was gutted by fire, but footprints in the dust led to a stairwell. Sarah climbed. 1st floor, 2nd, 3rd. At the 4th floor landing, everything changed. The door was new, solid wood with fresh hinges, and beneath it, a faint glow. She pressed her ear to the door. Voices, then distinctly, a woman's voice. Lot 17, Victorian mourning brooch, jet and seed pearls. Provenance, Graceland Cemetery, 1894 internment. Opening bid, $200. An auction. They were running an auction of items from graves. Sarah pushed the door open. What she saw made her stop breathing. Where the 4th floor had been transformed. Clean. Organized. Tables lined the walls, each covered in black velvet. Candles provided amber light. And the merchandise, jewelry displayed on trays, watches, lockets. Every piece had a small card. Cemetery name, date of interment, description of the deceased. Maybe 15 people browsed the tables, examining items with jeweler's loops. They looked like estate sale attendees, not criminals. At the far end, a silver-haired woman in her 60s sat behind a larger table, conducting business with quiet efficiency. This wasn't random crime. This was organized, systematic, a functioning black market for grave goods. How long had this been running? How many graves robbed? The silver-haired woman looked up and saw Sarah. Their eyes met. Then the woman smiled. Warm, welcoming, completely inappropriate, and gestured for Sarah to enter. Sarah's options crystallized. She could run, go to the police, but what proof did she have? And by the time police got a warrant, this place would be empty. Or she could walk in, pretend to be a buyer, get close enough to understand how this worked, and gather real evidence. Sarah took a breath and stepped into the market. The woman's smile widened. First time? She asked. Don't be nervous. Everyone's cautious their first visit. I'm Helen. Welcome to the market. Sarah had just made a choice that would change everything. Sarah left the warehouse at 3:47 a.m. with a business card in her pocket. Plain white, just a phone number embossed in black ink. Text before you visit, Helen had told her. We screen our buyers carefully, but I can tell you, appreciate quality. Back in her apartment, Sarah wrote down everything. Every face, every item, the layout, Helen's mannerisms, the cash transaction she'd witnessed. Then she started researching. Chicago cemetery desecration cases, funeral home theft, grave robbery laws. What she found made the scope clear. Sporadic reports over 5 years. A family finding a grave disturbed at Graceland. Jewelry missing from a body at a Lincoln Park funeral home. A damaged mausoleum at Oak Woods. But nothing connected. Each treated as isolated vandalism because no one was looking at it as organized crime. Sarah spent 2 days researching while maintaining her normal routine, classes, meetings with her thesis advisor, campus life. But every free moment went to the investigation. She created a spreadsheet of cemetery incidents, mapping them by location and date. Clusters appeared around the same cemeteries Helen had mentioned. She also researched the law. What she was planning, infiltrating the market to gather evidence, existed in a gray area. But she had no faith that a single tip would lead to meaningful action. This operation had been running for years. They had systems, security. If she wanted to stop this, she needed to gather evidence they couldn't ignore. Names, faces, documentation, then go to police with a complete case. On the third day, Sarah texted Helen's number. Helen, this is Sarah from Saturday. Would love to visit again. When is your next evening? The response came within an hour. Tomorrow night, 2 a.m. Looking forward to seeing you. Sarah spent that day preparing. Her phone had a voice recorder that picked up conversation clearly if kept in her jacket pocket. Not admissible in court probably, but enough to corroborate testimony. She also created a cover story. Private collector building an estate of Victorian mourning jewelry. Morbid, but plausible. That night, Sarah dressed the part. Dark jeans, fitted blazer, silk blouse. She looked like someone with money and taste. The walk to the warehouse felt different this time. Less fear, more purpose. She climbed the stairs with observation mode activated. Every detail mattered now. The fourth floor was busier, maybe 25 people. Helen sat in her usual spot, conducting transactions with calm efficiency. When she saw Sarah, genuine pleasure crossed her face. Sarah, I'm so glad you came back. She brought out a velvet-lined box containing a mourning brooch. Jet black, carved willow tree, compartment for hair. 1870s, removed from Rose Hill last week. The deceased was Catherine Brennan, Irish immigrant, made by her daughter. Sarah examined it, feeling sick. It was beautiful, and stolen from a grave 2 weeks ago. She focused on the roll. It's stunning. How much? For you? 400? Sarah didn't buy it yet. She needed to establish herself as serious but not desperate. Instead, she browsed, meeting other vendors. One man wore a funeral home name tag he'd forgotten to remove. Brennan and Sons, Lincoln Park. Sarah memorized it. She spent 2 hours that night, building relationships, asking questions that mapped the operation. They met twice monthly. Helen had been running it for 7 years. There was a waiting list. Buyers had to be vouched for, screened. When she left at 4:15 a.m., Sarah had recorded 40 minutes of conversation, photographed 12 items, and identified 3 people clearly on the supply side. Back home, she transcribed everything, created files for each person, started building a network map, It was becoming a real investigation. She needed more proof, more connections. She needed to find the inside source at the funeral homes. She needed to become indispensable so they'd let her deeper in. Sarah looked at her reflection in the dark window. She was crossing lines, but someone had to stop this. By her third visit, Sarah had a routine. Text Helen the day before, receive confirmation, prepare in the evening. She'd created an encrypted folder on her laptop for evidence, backed up to cloud storage under a pseudonym. Tonight was different. She was making her first purchase. Helen had held the mourning brooch, and buying it would cement her status. The thought of paying $400 for stolen property made her sick, but she rationalized it as evidence. Physical proof, with documented Rose Hill provenance. The market had grown familiar. Same candlelight, same velvet tables, same well-dressed criminals pretending this was civilized. Sarah moved through with confidence now, greeting people she recognized. Helen beamed when Sarah approached. "I had a feeling you'd be back for the brooch." She brought out the velvet box. The jet willow tree gleamed. Sarah counted out $400, money she'd withdrawn and documented as evidence. Helen wrapped the piece carefully. "Catherine Brennan's daughter made this with her own hands. You're preserving history. That's what we do here." The rationalization was perfect. They weren't grave robbers. They were preservationists. It let them sleep at night. "How did you get started in this?" Sarah asked, recording everything. Helen settled into her chair, pleased to tell the story. "I was an estate buyer for years. Legitimate business. But the most beautiful pieces were being buried, wasted. So I started asking questions. Found people who worked in cemeteries and funeral homes. We started small, just recovering pieces from graves that were being disturbed anyway. But then we realized no one checks. As long as you're careful, no one ever knows." Sarah's mind raced. This was confession to systematic criminal enterprise. "How many people are involved?" Helen's eyes sharpened slightly, but then relaxed. "About 6 primary suppliers. Cemetery workers, funeral directors, 1 crematorium operator. They identify opportunities and handle extraction. Then maybe 40 buyers, though only 20 active at any time. 6 suppliers, 40 buyers, 7 years." Sarah calculated. If they met twice monthly with 10 items each, that was 240 grave robberies annually, nearly 2,000 over 7 years. "Do you ever worry about getting caught?" Helen laughed. "Who's going to catch us? Families visit graves maybe once a year. We replace everything before the casket is resealed. Funeral homes are even easier. Families are grieving. Not conducting inventories. Police don't even have a category for this." A commotion at the entrance interrupted them. Helen excused herself. Sarah saw her opportunity. The lockbox sat beneath Helen's table, and next to it, a ledger, an actual physical record. Sarah pulled out her phone, pretended to check messages, and snapped 3 quick photos of the open pages. Names, items, prices, dates. When Helen returned, Sarah asked, "I'm curious about the funeral home side. That seems riskier." Helen nodded. "It requires the right person. We have a director at Brennan & Sons in Lincoln Park. He's been with us 3 years, only takes from people who've had their viewings. What they don't know doesn't hurt them." Brennan & Sons, the name from the tag she'd seen. "That's the funeral director I've seen here," Sarah said casually. Helen smiled. Thomas Brennan, 3rd generation. Would you like to meet him? He has access to extraordinary pieces." An hour later, Sarah stood talking to Thomas Brennan while her phone recorded everything. Charming, educated. He showed her photos on his phone of pieces he'd recovered, a locket from a 97-year-old woman, a platinum band from a veteran's burial, pearls from a young mother's service. Each item represented a family's final wish, and he'd stolen them all. When she left at 4:30 a.m., Sarah had 2 hours of recordings, photos of Helen's ledger, and a funeral director's full confession. But she had a problem. Helen had asked if Sarah might want to help with acquisition. Her forensic background would be useful. The line between infiltrator and accomplice was getting thin. She had maybe 2 more visits before her cover became a trap. Sarah spent a week researching how to contact law enforcement without compromising the investigation. Going to regular police meant explaining her trespassing and illegal recordings in Illinois, a 2-party consent state. Defense attorneys would shred the case. But the FBI handled organized crime and cultural property theft. Illinois State Police investigated fraud and corruption. Either might build their own case independently of her illegal evidence. The problem was timing. Contact them too early, the operation would disappear and regroup elsewhere. She needed one more piece. Who coordinated the suppliers? Was Helen the sole operator? Her 4th market visit answered that question. The atmosphere was tense. Helen kept checking her watch. Vendors whispered in groups. Something was wrong. Sarah approached Helen. Everything okay? Helen glanced up. Fine. Just waiting on someone. My partner. He handles coordination, scheduling, security, vetting buyers. I handle sales. We're a team. A partner. The missing piece. Will I meet him? Probably. Helen stopped, looking toward the entrance. There he is. The man who walked in was maybe 40, well-dressed in an expensive suit. He moved with confidence, greeting people by name, checking with suppliers. When he removed his coat, Sarah saw the lanyard. Chicago Police Department. Detective Daniel Reeves. Sarah's world tilted. A police detective. Not just involved, but running it. That explained everything. Why they'd operated 7 years without being caught, why they had sophisticated security, why they seemed untouchable. Helen waved her over. Sarah, meet Daniel. He's been curious about our new collector. Sarah shook Reeves's hand on legs that felt unsteady. She could feel him assessing her with an interrogator's practiced eye. Helen speaks highly of you, Reeves said pleasantly. Says you have real appreciation for Victorian mourning culture, rare in someone your age. I'm doing my PhD in forensic anthropology, Sarah said. Death ritual is part of my research. Reeves smiled. We could use someone with your expertise, someone who understands burial practices, decomposition rates, how to work a site without leaving evidence. This was the invitation she'd been dreading. The moment where she'd commit to actual grave robbery or reveal herself. Sarah bought time. I'm flattered and interested, but I'd want to understand the process better first. Maybe observe? Reeves nodded approvingly. Smart. Be cautious. We have an acquisition scheduled Friday. Oakwood Cemetery. Simple extraction. Low risk. Come along. Just watch. Then decide. Sarah's throat went dry. Friday. 3 days away. I'd like that. Friday works. Reeves clapped her shoulder. Excellent. Meet here at midnight. And Sarah, this is the trust threshold. Once you're part of acquisition, you're part of the family. Understand? Sarah understood perfectly. After Friday, she wouldn't be an infiltrator. She'd be an accomplice. She had 3 days to figure out how to stop this without destroying herself. The rest of the visit blurred. Sarah bought a ring she didn't want, made small talk she didn't remember, left at 3:45 a.m., promising to return Friday. Back home, Sarah assessed her options. She had evidence, recordings, photos, documented transactions. She had names: Helen, Thomas Brennan, Daniel Reeves. But no way to deliver it without Reeves knowing. Unless she could get them Friday. If she recorded the actual grave robbery with a police detective present, that would be irrefutable. Even if earlier recordings were inadmissible, that one event would launch an investigation, especially if she got it to someone outside Chicago PD. Sarah researched federal jurisdiction over cemeteries, FBI contacts, procedures for reporting police corruption. She drafted an anonymous email to the FBI field office, explaining the market, attaching encrypted evidence, promising photo documentation of a grave robbery Friday at Oakwood Cemetery. She set it to send automatically Saturday at 1 a.m. after the robbery, but soon enough for action. It was risky. If anything went wrong Friday, she'd have no backup. But if it worked, she'd have everything needed to bring down the entire operation. The drive to Oakwood Cemetery took 20 minutes. Sarah sat in the back seat between Helen and Mike, the groundskeeper who'd identify the target grave. Reeves drove with casual confidence. James navigated, using a tablet showing cemetery layouts. The family is Morrison, James explained. Margaret Morrison died last week at 86. Buried with her wedding jewelry. 2-carat diamond ring, platinum band, pearl necklace. The daughter specifically requested they bury her in her best pieces. Sarah's stomach churned. They read obituaries like shopping catalogs. How recent is too recent? Sarah asked, playing curious student. Mike answered. Week-old grave is perfect. Ground still soft, but settled enough that families don't usually visit. They're still processing. 2-week window after burial before it gets risky. They reached Oakwood at 12:40 a.m. Mike unlocked the gates. Of course he had keys. They drove slowly through winding paths, headlights off, until they reached the newer section. There, a fresh grave with temporary funeral home signage. Margaret Morrison. They parked to block the view and got to work. Mike and James removed flowers carefully, spread tarps to catch dirt, then began digging. Within 40 minutes, they'd exposed the burial vault. Mike used a portable winch to lift the vault lid, revealing the casket. This is the delicate part, Reeves said, standing beside Sarah under an umbrella as rain started. We don't open the casket here. Too risky. We lift it, transport to a secure location, extract what we need, return before dawn. Family never knows. Sarah's mind reeled. They were taking the entire casket? Where do you take it? Mike has a workshop at the maintenance building. Climate controlled, private. We reseal everything properly. Casket goes back in a few hours. Like we were never here. The winch strained as they lifted the dark wood casket and loaded it into a trailer. Professional operation. No damage. Want to see the extraction process? Reeves asked. Fascinating from a forensic perspective. This was it. The moment her cover would hold or break. Yes, I want to see the whole process. The maintenance building housed Mike's workshop, actually a fully equipped mortuary preparation room. Sarah understood immediately. Mike wasn't just a groundskeeper. He was a licensed funeral director. They positioned the casket on a hydraulic table. Mike opened it, revealing Margaret Morrison. Peaceful. Yes, blue dress. Hands folded. Diamond ring catching light. Pearl necklace gleaming. Photos for the ledger, Reeves directed. James photographed the body, documenting jewelry in place. Sarah, we document everything before touching anything. Chain of evidence. Except we're preventing waste, not investigating crime. Mike removed the jewelry with gloved hands, placing each piece in velvet boxes. Then he replaced them with convincing fakes from a drawer of costume jewelry. The replacement is key, Helen explained. Most funeral homes wouldn't notice. If families request another viewing, they see what they expect. Confirmation bias is our best security. Sarah's phone was recording all of this. The process. The casual discussion of deception. Evidence that couldn't be disputed. Sarah, Reeves said suddenly, come here. Before we seal the casket, verify the replacement looks convincing. Fresh eyes. This was a test. Reeves was evaluating whether she could handle this participation. Sarah stepped forward, looked at Margaret Morrison's body, at the fake diamond, the costume pearls, the peaceful expression that would be buried while real jewelry was sold. It looks perfect, Sarah said, voice steady despite nausea. No one would know. Reeves smiled. Welcome to the team, Sarah. You're officially one of us now. They resealed the casket, returned it to the grave, restored everything. By 4:30 a.m., the grave looked untouched. Sarah rode back in silence. The jewelry was cataloged for the next market. Margaret Morrison's children would never know. You did well tonight, Reeves said, dropping her off. Think about taking on more responsibility. Sarah nodded, then walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop and pulled out her phone. 5 hours of perfect recording, visual evidence, full confessions. She had everything. At 8 a.m., she walked into the FBI field office and asked to speak to someone about organized crime. The agent looked skeptical, until Sarah played the first 30 seconds of Daniel Reeves directing a grave robbery. By 9 a.m., the FBI had her full statement. By noon, they'd obtained emergency warrants. By 6 p.m., they'd arrested Reeves, Helen, Thomas Brennan, Mike, James, and 7 regular buyers. By week's end, they'd recovered over 300 items and identified nearly 200 desecrated graves. The operation made national news. Grave robbery ring, broken by grad student infiltrator. Sarah's name was withheld initially, but eventually she did interviews, explaining what had led her to investigate and why she'd risked herself to stop it. The legal aftermath was complicated. Some evidence was ruled inadmissible due to Illinois recording laws. But the final night's recording, I combined with FBI surveillance started after her report, provided enough for federal charges. Reeves got 15 years for corruption and conspiracy. Helen got 12. Thomas Brennan lost his license and got 8 years. Buyers faced sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. Sarah faced no charges. Prosecutors agreed she'd acted as a citizen investigator, and her cooperation was essential. Her academic career wasn't damaged. Her thesis on death ritual and modern grave robbery became widely cited. She graduated with honors and was recruited by the FBI to consult on cemetery crimes and funeral home fraud. But she never forgot that fourth floor, the candlelight, the casual conversations about desecration, how ordinary people had convinced themselves stealing from the dead was noble, and she never forgot Margaret Morrison. Sarah made sure Morrison's children received their mother's actual jewelry. She attended the reinterment ceremony when the family laid Margaret to rest again, this time with her real rings, real pearls, and a marker explaining what had happened and how justice had been served. The story dominated news for weeks. Sarah controlled the narrative carefully, focusing on sociology and policy rather than thriller aspects. Her thesis expanded into a book that became required reading in forensic anthropology courses. Illinois overhauled cemetery oversight laws. Funeral homes faced new inspections. A special task force was created to investigate grave desecration. Sarah consulted on the task force, training investigators to recognize organized theft patterns. Every investigator she trained was another barrier against operations like Helen's. The trials took 2 years. Sarah testified at each, walking juries through evidence. Defense attorneys tried to paint her as unreliable, but FBI's independent investigation corroborated everything. When the guilty verdict came down for Reeves, Sarah felt no satisfaction, just sadness for the waste. Helen pleaded guilty and testified against Byers for a reduced sentence. She maintained she'd been preserving history. The judge gave her 12 years anyway. 5 years after the investigation, Sarah spoke at a national conference on cemetery management. She told them about the market, about Helen and Reeves and Thomas Brennan, but also about Margaret Morrison and the families who'd trusted their loved ones would rest in peace. The dead can't protect themselves, Sarah said. They rely on us, the living, to honor their final wishes. When we fail that duty, we break something fundamental. Your work matters. The systems you build, the oversight you provide, the care you take, it all matters. The speech received a standing ovation. Sarah never married. Her life became her work, teaching, consulting, advocating. On the 10-year anniversary, Chicago Magazine asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah thought about the risks, the laws she'd bent, the nights wondering if she'd be caught, about Margaret Morrison and 800 other victims, about families who'd gotten justice. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. Someone had to care enough to do something." Sarah Mitchell still lives in Chicago, still works at the university, still consults with law enforcement, and sometimes, late at night, she stands at her window, looking out over the city lights. Remembering the warehouse that no longer shows a flickering candle. The market is closed, the criminals imprisoned, the systems reformed, and Sarah sleeps well, knowing she made that happen. But she still watches, still pays attention, still trusts her instincts, because somewhere there's probably another market, and somewhere there's another person who can't sleep, who's paying attention. Sarah hopes they'll have the courage to act, because the world needs people who can't look away.